So today we are starting chapter 4. So we are in lesson 1 in chapter 4, and that's going to be over tables and graphs. So to start our lesson off, we are going to talk about a little bit of vocabulary. Our first vocabulary word is linear equation. A linear equation is an equation whose graph is a straight line. You're able to identify a linear equation because they have no exponents on the variables. So if I see x squared or x to the second, I know that this is not going to be a linear equation, or it will be nonlinear. So a linear equation is a straight line. So make sure that you keep that in mind. Our second vocabulary word is a solution. So a solution is the points on the line are solutions of the equation. So if you're thinking about a graph, so let's draw a little graph right here. So we've got our y-axis and we've got our x-axis, and then let's put a line right there. So there's my line. It doesn't matter where I put my pen on this line. I could put it here, I could put it here, I could put it here, I could put it there. It doesn't matter. Every single point on that line is a solution. And each one of these points has an x and a y coordinate. So every single point is an x comma y. And so there are infinitely many solutions because there is an x and there is a y for every single one of these points. So when you're thinking about that solution, that's why we have to graph, because there's not just one number that I can plug in for my x and for my y. There are infinitely many because every single point on that graph is going to be a solution. So using that idea of a solution, that's how we're going to create and form our knowledge for this lesson. So keep that in mind for the future. But first off, we're going to start off with a warm-up. So this is from chapter 1, the last chapter that we were working on. This first one, you're going to be solving for y like it says, but you're going to end up with a one solution. So this is a two-step problem that has one solution at the bottom. The second one, you notice that there's two different variables, so you're just going to manipulate those variables. So at the end, you get y equals, and you're going to have a lot of junk on that right side. Make sure that you write it in y equals mx plus b form if you remember what that means. So pause the video, try these two problems, and I will do the same and have your answer in a couple seconds. And here's our two answers for these problems. So for the first one, you should have gotten y equals 6. For that second one, if you wrote it correctly, it should say y equals negative 2x plus 16. If you did it backwards, it might say y equals 16 minus 2x. So the reason that I wanted it in this form is because this is a form that we can easily graph off of. So in 8th grade, we're going to be doing a lot of graphing, especially in this chapter. This is the way that the equation is always going to be written. So if you notice, y and x stay y and x, because if you think of that idea of a solution, I can plug any number I want into there, and then it's going to tell me what the other one is. But that m and that b stay constant or stay the same for this equation. So every single point on this equation is going to go off of the slope of negative 2 and off of my y-intercept of 16. So that b means y-intercept, that m means my slope. So using our idea of solutions, let's go into actually solving some problems. So we're going to figure out what the solution looks like for this equation. In order to do that, we're going to complete the table. So if you look at this table, on the left side, it has our input of x. These four numbers, I just randomly chose. Typically, we want to choose a number that is negative, a number that is positive, and then 0. The fourth number, it doesn't matter. Just choose something that's easy to work with. And so there are going to be times where one number is a lot better to choose than another. We'll get into that later. So for this problem, I chose those four inputs for my x. what we're going to do is we're going to take that, we're going to plug it into our equation up here, or substitute it, we're going to simplify, and we're going to get our output. So let's go through and do that. I'm going to plug in my -1 into my equation, so y equals 2 times x, but I don't write an x, I write a -1, and then -3. I'm going to follow my order of operations for this. Order of operations says for this problem, I'm going to do multiplication first. So 2 times -1 is going to give me a -2, and then I keep my -3. Now I have to take -2 minus 3, which we know is going to give us a -5. That's because I KCO'd, so I kept my first number, I changed my subtraction to addition, and then I did the opposite of the second number. So it was a +3, now it's a -3. Now we've got -2 plus -3, which is obviously -5. And so that's going to be our output. That's what we ended up with. Our input is -1, and our output is -5. So that is going to be one solution to our equation up here. So that is one possible thing that I could plug in to make it correct. Let's go ahead and graph it on this graph over here. So in order to graph this, I know my x is -1 and my y is -5. And so I'm looking for this point right here because it's always written as x, comma, y. To graph this, I'm going to start at 0, 0, which is right in the middle of my graph. I want to mess with my x first. You might be like, Miss Christie, which way do I go for x? I'm glad you asked. That's your little hint right there. Our x is our horizontal line right here. Think of it kind of like a number line. And then our y goes off of this line right here. Think of this as a number line as well, it's just vertical. So it's rotated on its side. So it went from here to up there. So let's go ahead and graph that. Again, I'm starting at the point 0, 0, and I want to move -1 on my x. Remember, x is left to right, so we're going to move left 1 because that's going to give us a -1. So this is my new starting point. Now I'm going to move on to my y. It says that my y is going to be a -5. And so remember, our y is that vertical line. So I want to stay on this line because I know that my x is -1 already. But on this line, I want to move to where -5 is for my y. And negative means down, and I'm going to move down 5 places. So this is the point that I am at. I want you to try to do this one by yourself. I'm going to pause the video, you should too, and then press play when you have this all done and you have the next point graphed. So when you substituted 0 in for our x, we should have ended up with an output of -3. So our point that we're graphing is going to be 0, -3. So that is another solution to our equation. When I went ahead and graphed that, started at 0, 0, I could not move any left or right because my x is a 0. It's locking me into that position. And then I moved down 3 because it says -3 for my y. Up and down is y, so down is going to be my negative option. So now that I have 2 points, I can make a prediction on where I think my third point is going to end up. So if I'm looking at this and I'm thinking about slope right now, slope is rise over run. So how many am I going up and how many am I going over? So I'm going up 1, 2 spaces, and then right 1 space. So let's make a prediction. If I keep going on this same slope, I'm going to go up 2 and over 1, or right 1. And so my next point should be where x is 1 and y is -1. So if I do this correctly and my prediction's correct, I should get a -1 for my output. So go ahead and substitute 1 in and see if you get -1 for that answer. And we're correct. So I know that I was correct because we did those 2 first points correctly. But when I'm looking at my x is 1, that's the input that I put in. And so make sure that that matches up when you are making your predictions. If we make another prediction for that fourth number, let's change it to, we'll do orange color. We're going to go up 2 over 1, or right 1, sorry. And so this is when x equals 2, which is what our input's going to be. Y should equal 1. And so when you plug that in, it should give you a positive 1 for your answer. And that looks like what it's going to be. So 2 times 2 is 4, minus 3 is going to give me a positive 1. So we were correct, and these are our 4 points. The last thing that we need to do is we need to draw a line to connect the points. Because, like what I told you before, every single point on this line is a solution. So we are going to draw a line all the way through our graph because every single point on that line is a solution, not just the 4 that we found. So technically, if I really wanted to, I could say that I want to find this point right here. Would I ever want to find that point right there? My answer would be no, because then I would have to deal with decimals. I don't like messing with decimals, and I know you guys don't either. And so that's why we choose points that perfectly cross on our grid lines, because those grid lines are telling us that we have whole numbers or at least decimals that are a little bit easier to work with. So that's why we typically stay on that grid line, is because those are our whole or numbers or integers. So I'm going to walk you through choosing some x's, but after we choose our x's together, I want you to try this problem on your own and try to graph it after you complete the table. So for this particular problem, it honestly doesn't really matter what x's we choose. Like I said before, we typically like to choose one number that's negative, one number that's positive, and 0. The last one doesn't matter. We typically choose a positive number because they're a little bit easier to work with. And so those are the 4 x's that I selected. Go through, use these x's to figure out what your y is going to be. A helpful hint, we can use our knowledge of rewriting equations to make this a lot easier to solve. And so right now, it's not written in the proper form. So that's going to make it really difficult for us. So before I let you guys go on your way, let's go ahead and just do that together. So we are looking at 2x plus 2y equals 16. So we're going to be solving this for y, which means we have to get rid of this 2x. Whatever I do to one side, I have to do to the other, and I can't put those two together. And so I'm just going to write them next to each other. Negative 2x, and then that's a positive 16 plus 16. Now I'm dividing by 2, divide by 2, divide by 2, and we're left with y equals negative 1x plus 16 divided by 2 is going to give me an 8. Remember, you don't have to multiply by 1. Technically, you could have just written negative x. So whatever my x is, I'm multiplying it by negative 1, and then I'm adding 8 to it. And so what I would do is use this form instead of that form, because you are more likely to get all 4 of these correct if you use that form. So pause the video now and try it out. I realized I had to extend my graph just a little bit, so that's what I did. So I added a couple more lines up there, but this is the line that you should have graphed. So finished out my chart, so it's just going down by 1 each time when it starts at 9, so 9, 8, 7, 6. And so I graphed the point negative 1, positive 9, starting at 0, 0, negative 1, positive 9. Starting at 0, 0, 0, 8. My third point, starting at 0, 0, 1, 7. And my last point, starting at 0, 0, 2, 6. And then draw a line to connect all those points. Make sure it goes all the way through your coordinate plane, that grid there.